Spirituality and Public Policy, co-director of the Center for Legal Empowerment of the Poor and senior fellow, Jindal India Institute. His last edited book published on December 2023 was titled Applied Spirituality and Sustainable Development Policy. Professor Singh was a visiting scholar at several universities, including Boston, Harvard, and Guelph, among others. He has been a consultant to the UN Development Programme, the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Pan American Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, and the Food and Agriculture Organization. We welcome you, sir.
Now, I would like Dr. Bindra to please come up on the stage and felicitate Miss Bulbul Dhar. Professor Bulbul Dhar is a distinguished academician renowned for her expertise in political science, human rights, and global governance. Currently serving as a professor in the Department of Political Science and the coordinator of the MA Human Rights Program at Jamia Millia Islamia. Dr. Bulbul Dhar brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to her role. Her research interests span various fields including human rights, political economy of globalization, governance, African studies, and gender empowerment. Her extensive experience includes serving as a director of the Women's Studies Center, coordinator of the MA Political Science program, and consultant roles at prestigious institutions such as NCAER, New Delhi. Her contributions extend globally, including participation in dialogue at the Human Rights Council in Geneva and membership on editorial boards of international journals. Moreover, she plays pivotal roles as a content writer for Ministry for Human Resource Development Programs and serves on advisory panels for numerous NGOs and government bodies, demonstrating her dedication to shaping policies and initiatives for societal advancement. We welcome you, ma'am.
Next, we are honored to have Mr. Rajesh Mahapatra. I would request Dr. Shalini Saxena to please felicitate Mr. Mahapatra. Mr. Mahapatra has been at various points over the last 30 years a business journalist, political analyst, public policy expert, editor, and newsroom leader. Currently, he is the founding editor-in-chief of the Secretariat, a newly launched media platform that offers insightful analysis and research on public policy. He is the former editor of Press Trust of India, the country's premier news agency. He has worked with national and international publications such as the Hindustan Times, the Associated Press, and the Bridge News. At Hindustan Times, where he spent more than a decade, Mr. Mahapatra drove organizational change and digital transformation. He is also the founder of Odisha Dialogues, a non-participant thought leadership forum that promotes Odisha-focused research and advocacy. We welcome you, sir.
Now, I would like to call upon Dr. Bindra, sir, to please felicitate Mr. Harish Damodaran. He is the National Rural Affairs and Agricultural Editor of the Indian Express and also Senior Visiting Fellow at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. A journalist with over 32 years of experience as a reporter and editorial analyst, mostly writing on agriculture and related policy issues. He has worked with the Press Trust of India, the Hindu Business Line, and the Indian Express. He has also been a fellow of the New India Foundation, Bangalore, and visiting scholar at the Center for the Advanced Study of India at the University of Pennsylvania. He is also the author of 2 books, the first of which, India's New Capitalist, Caste, Business and Industry, won the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award under the Non-Fiction Books category for 2008. And the second, Broke to Breakthrough, the Rise of India's Largest Private Dairy Company, the Gaza Capital Business Book Prize for 2022. With his expertise in rural development and environmental issues, Mr. Damodaran's perspective will undoubtedly enrich our discussion. We welcome you, sir.
And finally, let's take a moment to acknowledge our moderator for this session, Dr. Chandrika Parmar, whose expertise and guidance will steer our conversation. Ma'am is unwell, still she managed to join us. We're grateful, ma'am. I would request Dr. Bindra to felicitate Dr. Chandrika Parmar. Dr. Chandrika Parmar is Associate Professor at SP Jain Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai. She is also the Director at Development of Corporate Citizenship. Dr. Parmar is also the current UNPRME India Chapter Chair, a collaboration of business schools in India engaging in building and supporting education ecosystem that will build responsible corporate managers. Dr. Parmar is a qualitative researcher with a DPhil in Management Studies from Said Business School, University of Oxford. Her work has ranged across various domains, including partition memories, environmental values, election studies, technological controversies, social movements, and experiential learning. She has been engaged with how democratic values are reworked around these sites. Her current interests center around science, technology, and society, disaster studies, humanitarianism, sociology of knowledge, sociology of violence, futures, alternatives, public policy, democratic theory, and social movements. Thank you, Dr. Parmar, for leading this session.
To guide us through this crucial discussion, we have a distinguished panel of experts, each bringing a unique perspective to the table. Together, our panelists will explore the intricacies of ownership, accountability, and sustainability in the test of our planet. We encourage you all to actively engage in this conversation by posing your questions and sharing your perspectives.
May the deliberations begin. Over to you, Dr. Parmar, and our esteemed panelists. Yeah, sure.
taking a decision. What if you're an animal of a certain sort? Then what is it that you would be doing? So are we putting man at the center of all of this? Or is it something beyond that? I think that's the fundamental question that we've got to ask ourselves as we become trustees of the future, or we talk about the civilization, so to say. I'll just go on to Bulbul to just, just continue the conversation.
So we've really moved from a very macro perspective to a little larger spiritual angle, which was really appreciated as well. And then you go on to speak about, I presume, man in not a very gender neutral way, for whatever it's worth. So I would like to look at a larger macro perspective in answer to that question in terms of sustainability, in terms of intergenerational equity, which is what all of us are actually speaking about in different ways. And because the theme of this is also got to do with technology, so the good and bad, the threat and the opportunity that technology provides. So maybe look at GMO, for instance, as well. Is that something way forward? Was that green revolution that Pindra Saab is speaking about? We're questioning it now, that whole HIV variety, and looking at it from another perspective. So perhaps when we look at this, whose planet we're looking at, perhaps not quite as ownership, but as trustees, because that's what we are, because we're looking at the next generation also having, the whole Bluntland Commission definition of sustainable development needs to be, put in perspective in that sense of the term, in terms of the next generations and how much we are consuming, or as one of your quotes while coming here, Gandhi's words of enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed, which is what we are, the acquisitiveness, the consumerism that we are, kind of coming up with. I also want to flag the issue of, since you mentioned man, to flag the issue of ownership being very masculine kind of a thing, including ownership of the wife. The court judgment for marital rape spoke about how the wife is, the property, and, that should be questioned. So the ownership notions, and this is something that ecofeminism brought in a major way, is, the equality of nature and women, the same, the nurturing, the element of the change that was being sought. So in fact, ecofeminists have, brought that up in big ways, and we've had, the stakeholders, the rest of the subtext was also, the last bit is to do with ingenuity, human ingenuity, which I think the resilience and the ingenuity, I'd like to flag that women have brought in a whole lot of issues on that quarter. So that needs to be looked at in major ways. And what I feel that this kind of a public policy framework can, a kind of a forum can really flag these issues in terms of bringing about that change towards equality. Everybody's planet, not just some people's planet, which means the farmers, which means every other category that we can be unnamed ones that we are speaking about, that the change needs to come about in those ways, because what science and biotechnology and others are doing is the good and bad together. I mean, how do we sift that? I'm not a scientist. I would not know. So I'm going to, research this from one perspective. So this whole hierarchical technological change that is happening needs to be, looked at, like reshuffling of the spatial kind of hierarchies that are there, or the old sector overlapping with the new technological domains, because that's the way forward, or seems to be, as you were putting it, use less for more outflows. So are we looking at quality there? Maybe not. We're looking at quantity. And so that balance in achieving a planet for all with equality. And later on, sometime, I do want to flag issues related to gender more than anything else, because I think that's really, really crucial, because it's a public policy forum and mainstreaming of gender is really not being done in huge ways. And that really, really is needed, because that's half the demographic dividend that we are speaking about. And that needs to be brought into question. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'll.
My mind, just cannot study public policy. I think you have to take into consideration the industry policy, the economic policy, the foreign policy, you can say the social policy. Every angle, the changing paradigm, and the political system working in a country. That's more important. If you compare our system, the Chinese system, the US patterns, or UK, everything altogether different. These are the issues which one has to keep in mind. Then there is always talk of good governance. Where the good governance is in India, not possible to implement in total. There are so many issues involved. There, in many parts of the country, even the power is not available. Because these are the issues. Thank you, sir.
So I'm not sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And very, no, absolutely. Very valid, important point.
I'm not sure I agree with you completely on that quarter, but we'll come to that. But
Yeah.
public
So,
policy is really, I mean, it's looking at societal kind of problems and the change that are being sought. So maybe we need to identify.
So again, important issues being raised by you, and also about the need for interdisciplinarity. The whole panel is talking in terms of moving from a language, being mindful of the language, of talking about ownership to trusteeship. We're talking about the whole idea of marginalities, and not just one marginality. I mean, Birbal, of course, spoke about gender, but there are several other marginalities. You spoke about the farmers. You spoke of where each one of us in different ways is a marginal in a different way. And yet, some margins are, and vulnerabilities are very visible. There are some which are very silent and which are not even visible or talked about. So as you're listening to this, Rajesh, you're wondering what you're thinking about. Whose planet is it anyway? Why do you think?
Well,
let me this question to us.
Thank you, Chandrika. I think it has started off well. Thank you, Vidisha, for having me here. Let me rephrase that question. I mean, I would like to rephrase that question. Whose planet should it be? The answer is very simple. Everyone's. Every living being. And that should include trees and plants as well. Now, the way Vidisha wanted to go about this session was she had identified areas for each one of us to focus on. And I think the way you put together the panel and the areas that you've asked people to focus on, I think together you will get a very, the big picture will come out. By the time we come to it, the big picture will come out of each of these not disparate, they're all connected bits. So my job was to talk about why the marginalized and the poor in cities and urban India do not get as much attention as they ought to get in public policy discourse. And what is it that we should be talking about? So let me just throw a few set of statistics and why it is important to talk about the marginalized and the poor in urban India today, much more important than it was 3 decades ago. Up until 3 decades ago, we actually never talked about urban poor. Whenever you talked about poverty, it was mostly about rural India. But, the rapid economic progress of the country triggered to a lot of people attribute migration only in terms of how poverty drove people out of their villages to cities. There are two ways of looking at it, and in economics we are always taught the pull factor and the push factor, and in any developing economy both factors are at work. Yes, there is growing distress, deprivation pushes people out of villages, but also the lure of a better life, economic mobility, social mobility keeps people drawing into its fold. So you saw very rapid urbanization during the 80s, 90s, and the first decade of the current millennium, because we can say that because we have data only up till 2011. We can't talk after that because we do not know what has happened to the urbanization pace thereafter. My suspicion would be, and I think Hari should probably second that, it might have slowed down in the last 10 to 12 years, and he probably would have more anecdotal evidence to it. Now, the cities kept growing as more and more people moved from villages to cities. And why did they move? Besides the push factor, I think let's focus on the pull factor, which is the access to mobility, upward social and economic mobility. That brought many of us into the cities, right? Many in the room here, I don't know who is a first generation rural to urban migrant in this city. Binrasa, are you one? No. So things have changed a lot. But our parents, my father was a rural to urban migrant, and many of the people sitting here, their parents should have been the village too. We probably are the second generation. But what am I? I'm a small town to big city migrant. Okay, and that would also hold true for some more people. So the first and foremost thing is access to mobility. So what is that guarantees social and upward mobility? It's education, right? That's where it begins. Now, if I take a little longer, I will not pitch in more in other sessions, so other speakers will have time. So if you could let me explain. So now, according to UN statistics, there are about 1 billion people in the world who live in slums or unrecognized settlements in cities across the world. 1 billion. And nearly a quarter of them would be in India. And that number is likely to grow unless we step in. What is wrong with that number? Why should we be stepping in? Because these are the people who lack everything that a person would define as a dignified lifestyle. There are no schools, there are no healthcare facilities, there are no basic amenities, and how much do we talk about it? Now let me ask a question. If any of you are Delhi based or a metropolitan based, all of you get support from domestic helps, right? Some of you have full-time in-house living. Most of you would be having domestic helps who would be coming in from where? Slums. How many times have you actually gone and seen how your domestic help lives? Can you raise hands? How many of you have visited the place where your domestic help lives? Great. Great. That's, the 5 hands went up. 6 hands, 10, 7 hands. Excellent. When you have visit there, do you not notice that they don't have any of those things that you and your children have had? Do they not need it? Do they not deserve it? Let me put the question. Isn't it their right to have access to those things? There is a reason why I'm asking and playing with these words. Do they not have a right to have the access to these things? And I'll come to it when I end why I'm asking the question. All of these people you interact, the chai wala bhaiya, the pan dukan wala bhaiya, your mechanic, the street vendor, the what we call golgappa wala. Okay? Every day you meet them, right? Every day they cross your life. How many times do you ask them, do they have enough savings in their bank if they fall sick or something happens to them to even survive for a month? Do they have any kind of social security? Do they have any kind of income security? When you are asked a question, what are you studying? You say, I am studying public administration, public policy at Amity. What do you intend to do? Growing up, passing out, I want to become an advocacy professional. I would like to be a corporate advisor. I would like to be in the government. You have ambitions. You are looking at opportunities. And through this, you also get access to those economic opportunities. What are the opportunities that are with these people? When you ask them, more often than not, they go blank. So there is no economic opportunities. We do not know what kind of security they have. If your shop catches fire, if your father's factory catches fire, if your father loses his job, there is insurance. If you lose your father or parents, there is insurance to cover for this. For $250 million that we talk about, there are no such things. So, why are those things not there? That is because we don't talk about it as a matter of right. We think, we derive a great sense of gratification sometimes by donating 100 rupees, 1,000 rupees to poor people. Yeah. I mean, I think, as I'm building my argument, you can think of the interventions that you like to make, and I think the moderator would provide. But this, I mean, if you excuse me, because this breaks my thought process, because I've not come here with a prepared speech. I'm building my argument. So just for a moment, stay with me, okay? Now that brings me to the question that we don't talk about. If we were to look at all of this as rights, and if we have to tailor our public policy discourse by recognizing these are rights, then what we would be asking is a deepening of the process of democratization. And it benefits all of us. And here is what I will finish with a small example. When I quit Hindustan Times, I went back to Odisha. And then I came back. I had sold my houses and everything here. I thought I would bid goodbye to Delhi. But things didn't work out for me in Odisha, so I came back. And we took a place on rent because my wife first returned. And she's a teacher. Her school is in Chanakyapuri. So we took a place in Basant Enclave, which are DDF flats. At one point in time, these were very sought after. All those bureaucrats, civil servants who could not buy a plot in Basant Vihar bought a flat there. It was seen as a very upwardly mobile middle class settlement. When I reached there, we would go to my apartment to the C block of Basant Vihar. And if any of you know, Basant Vihar is probably the most posh locality of Delhi. Wide roads, spick and span, everything. And then C block ends, and there is a big garbage dump, garbage thrown all around. You have to navigate, and bad roads. The roads had gone worse during the pandemic to reach my flat. And things were in a very bad shape in that Basant. It was like a lower middle class settlement, if one could use the word. And then I kept asking, why are these things not getting repaired? Now what do? We say, okay, usko bolte hain, isko bolte hain, ye contact lagate hain. So the person who had helped me get that house, he was also a very well-networked person. When I told him, he said, I'll talk to Kejriwal's office. 6 months passed by, nothing happened. The Basant Vihar road got very nicely rebuilt, the moment pandemic passed. And then we realized why nothing happened with us. Then there is Basant Gaon, which is where the underclass live. Things got fixed there. It's the middle class in the middle, didn't get anything. And that's when we decided to carry out a signature campaign in the society. And we took that signature campaign, met the MLA of the area who was from Aam Aadmi Party, and we just asked him. He said, you got the roads and places fixed for people in Basant Vihar who don't vote for your party, who don't even come to vote, and you ignored us? And he said, you are absolutely right. The Basant Vihar people don't vote for Aam Aadmi Party. Why are we spending money on them and not fixing this? The road got fixed. People tried many ways of saying, we will do this, we will do that. What I'm trying to say, that every citizen has a right, whether that citizen lives in a slum, whether that citizen lives in a condominium, he or she has a right. Rights have to be exercised. And if rights are exercised, and that can only happen if we believe in deepening the process of democratization. So I add from my side, Harish said, less is more. Dr. Naresh Singh brought up the issue of ownership versus trusteeship. He talked about trusteeship. He talked about collective ownership and responsibility in place of individual ownership and responsibility. Less is more, collective ownership, trusteeship, and Bulbul talked about equity in all aspects and in all dimensions. And I would add to that the importance of deepening the process of democratization, building a rights-based society, how that would hold the solution to all the problems. If you add up all these 5 things, I think you solve all the problems.
So Rajesh, in some senses, kind of summarize the discussion so far. Again, the language of trusteeship, access, dignity.
Sorry, I took
No,
way longer than I should
absolutely
have.
fine. So, the opportunities for access, but somewhere in the middle of all this, the nature somewhere still took a back seat. It's and something that we should probably again and again probably consciously foreground. So I just want to say, when you say taking again, in some senses, he's coming very close to taking again that language of ownership and rights, which is again. I'm going to again push the entire panel to ask, how do you create that as a public discourse? Each one out here plays a role in the public role, some as educators, some as creating opinions. So how do you create that space of the kind of conversation that we're having here?
I think one way to do it is to look at every human being as a producer. Okay, as a producer, I should have rights. Okay, to what I'm producing and what I'm selling. Okay, so I think Rajesh mentioned a very important element here, which is the people who are supplying us labor. Right? I mean, the people who are supplying us, whether as drivers, whether as mechanics, whether as barbers, whether as, coming home, the girls and boys who are delivering the stuff, whether it is the Zomato people, etc. Right? They are supplying. So the suppliers of labor and the suppliers of food, right? No farmers, no food. Right. So I think the best way to look at it is, to look at human beings not as consumers, but as producers, and when we start looking at people as producers, then we start looking at their well-being. How do we ensure that they are able to produce, in a sustainable way, in something and get a fair deal, for what they are selling. So then automatically, wages comes in, price for the produce. Today, farmers are asking for a minimum support price, right? I mean, it's a right. So I think that is the basis. I think when he came in, he was basically a producer, right? I mean, you produce, you gain, you make incomes, and then consumption follows after that, right? I mean, so I think we should look at the rights of producers, whether it is domestic health, whether it is laborers, whether it is farmers, and
I again push you, Harish. How do you create that public discourse for the producers?
I think definitely one way is a fair price, whether it is like for example, now we talk of minimum wages, right? I mean, there is a minimum wages act. Why not a right to a minimum support price, right? Consumer wants an MRP, right? I mean, a maximum retail price. Why not a minimum price? Whether it is to the Ola driver, whether it is to anybody. I think we should start off exactly what Rajesh said. Let us look at rights. Anybody as a instead of looking at people as consumers, labharthi, beneficiary. See, nobody wants doles. Okay. Everybody wants a price for what they are producing. Out of their hard work and this thing. Once you recognize the fundamental dignity of a person as a producer who's doing something, then I think everything else will follow. I look at it that way. Maybe
your thoughts?
I'm actually going to not agree with that, because we're the most rights-based constitution you can have in the world. And despite all those rights being in place, the implementation is zilch or very, very minimal. We have so many rights for, empowering women, for instance, or other categories. We have LGBTQ++, whatever rights that we are speaking about. We're talking about all this within the Constitution as fundamental rights. Yet, the implementation, and you could have all kinds of policies in place, And the idea of a policy to me is, public policy is government in action or inaction, whatever that we are looking at. So in response to public societal problems, and those problems are all addressed actually within the Constitution. It's just that the interpretation becomes somewhat warped, and the implementation doesn't reach the ground level. So you could throw in fundamental rights and say, okay, you go to the court of law. Who can afford to? So I think we're all sitting on this table around here, other converted. We really need to speak to others on that forum.
Because 5 hands went up when Rajesh, you asked the question. Only 5 hands of the entire community went up. So when
I thought that was a very patronizing question, by the way. To say, have you visited? So I mean, have we done anything beyond visiting? Have we done anything at an individual level?
So maybe not, but just saying that just the understanding of the space in that sense, just to push what Rajesh was doing.
I mean, if you never visited, you won't know what is going on there. And I mean, that's the starting point. And I don't think it was a patronizing act. I'm sorry. I think I'm an economist. Our research requires us to ask such questions.
I'm saying it because to create that sensibility, but to ask that, because he's asking is how do you create, and I'm asking the panel, how do you create that sensibility? Because as you said it, Bulbul, that that our constitution has all the rights, but that understanding and that there's a larger socialization will not happen.
I just want to draw that beyond. The idea was, patronizing was a bad word to use, but I feel that sometimes we get away with just saying and acting in a way that, we know about it, we are familiar with, the problems that are there. But what do we do individually? There is not much we can do. But we're also expecting the government to do it all, but we're looking at other facets which really need to bring that in a big way. And that's something that we need to tap on when we're looking at public policy in terms of inaction, perhaps, in a lot of ways. A policy in place, rights in place. Why the inaction? Like he did a show of hands here. I asked in a refresher course with all teaching faculty, and I'll ask, just the women in the faculty and say, how many of you have all these laws in place? And now you have, even the karta of the family can be a woman and all those laws in place. But if you were to, ask for property from your brother, husband, family, whatever, 1 or 2 hands at most go up. It's like less than 5%. You don't, even though having that policy in place, it's really the change that needs to be sorted in the mindsets and, making a difference in how we are thinking and, trying to do something concrete.
How do you create that mindset?
That's probably neat.
Yeah.
A few quick points, bearing in mind that we are in an academic conference setting, as well as this is a public policy conference. Bearing that in mind, I'll address a few points. First one is just to clarify my own first set of ideas, and that is even collective ownership in my argument, which is an improvement on what we have as private property, might be an improvement, but it is still wrong. That is my argument. Even trusteeship is the wrong concept. I am arguing for a total rethink, a radical rethink of our relationship with the planet. And it's not a relationship of ownership, which we have been educated to believe in. So all our economic thought is based on that, I know. But as students of public policy, I am asking you to rethink that relationship, and then how would public policy flow? And I'll give you a few points. Second point I'd make is the issue of greed. I used to believe that humans are by nature greedy. I believed that for a very long time. Until about recently, I realized that humans are only by nature greedy when they do not know their own nature. That's the problem, their own true nature. So I leave that second point with you. The third point is about rights. So if we are talking of human rights, every time you have rights, you have to have a duty bearer. So who is going to bear the duty or the obligation to deliver on the rights? And we are talking of economic, cultural, and social rights right now, right? And those rights, the duty bearer is the state. That's where the rights are held and need to be delivered on. As many of you would know, in the Convention on Economic, Cultural, and Social Rights, there is an escape clause. And that clause says the governments negotiated that clause and says they will have progressive realization of these rights. That is to say, they cannot meet it if they do not have the capacity. Even in Canada, where I live, our government doesn't have the capacity to meet all the rights and so on. So let us be realistic with what rights can the government meet. And it's one thing to celebrate rights, and I'm all for human rights, but also how does the duty bearer deliver? And maybe they can deliver much more than they are delivering, and that's another question. But your question, Dr. Parmar, is how do we begin to operationalize? In my experience in working on these issues of rights and poverty and the marginalized and so on, I find that the process of a bottom-up is critical to getting governments to deliver. And how do you do that? I put a 4-step process on the table. The first one is mobilization. And India has had a history of excellent mobilization at the grassroots level and action from the bottom up. And we need to do more of that because governments don't listen and they don't hear the voice of the poor. And so that mobilization is required, step 1. Step 2 is greater articulation in those groups. And then step 3, and we can't run away from it, is contestation. That process is not going to shift. We have to face that reality. The elite will not yield to the marginalized until we have contestation. And finally, when you win, it gets confirmed in law, so confirmation. And if you lose, well, you have to start over, right? So that's the operationalization way. I want to make 2 other points. Why did I make the point about the relationship between humans and nature? It is because the neoclassical economics we have been teaching for too long is fundamentally flawed. And our university needs, all our universities need to rethink how we teach neoclassical economics. And when I ask, why are we continuing to do this when we know the 4 basic assumptions of neoclassical economics have nothing to do with reality, I am told because the employers expect us to teach the students a bunch of neoclassical economics. I think that's a cop-out. The employers need to be re-educated because we are dealing with an artificial economic system that has nothing to do with reality. If you take, coming back to who owns the planet, if we teach, for example, environmental economics, essentially we are teaching neoclassical economics how to internalize the environment as an externality and getting the prices right. We are back into the same fundamental flaw that we have always had. When you teach ecological economics and you begin to take into consideration the limits of the planet, it's a very different game because your premise is different. Now you bring in behavioral economics, complexity economics, and so on, which is really different from neoclassical. And we're doing a bunch of that stuff. The final point I'd make is about ethics of public policy. So we all teach in our schools of government and policy, public policy, we teach ethical policy. But if you are going to rethink this relationship, utilitarian ethics is what we teach. And if we do a little better than that, we teach deontological ethics or moral duty. I am saying that even those 2 are limited. We have to begin to understand better and teach ontological ethics. Now, not very many people might agree with that, but this country pioneered ontological ethics, and the pioneer was Swami Vivekananda. You Google it, you will find what ontological ethics is all about. It's about being. It's not about human havings. So we call ourselves human beings. And we are busy teaching the ethics of having and the ethics of doing. Why are we not teaching the ethics of being? So I'm implementing that. So that's the other final point I'd make. So that this change in relationship with the nature and who owns the planet is not only philosophy, it translates directly into the curriculum of our public policy schools.
Thank you, Naresh. Thank you so much for that, because it kind of brings together, in some senses, what we've been wanting to push the conversation to, saying, okay, there are a wide range of opinions on this table from different point of but we are talking, we've been talking this talk for almost 50 years, 70 years, and we've been talking about wanting to shift that needle, but not really shifting it. But until unless we have that mindset change or the mindset creation, which is in a larger community sitting out here, we're not going to push that needle. And that needs certain systematic, it needs probably interventions at several levels, whether it is a public policy school, whether it is in terms of how you write in public spaces, or whether it is how we create the maryada of consumption, because we've even forgotten the maryada of consumption, so to say. I know there are a lot of hands out here going up, so let's take a few questions to the panel. So whoever has a question, just raise your hand. Tell us your name, and if it's directed towards a particular panelist.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Lucy, visiting faculty at MIT Institute of Public Policy, MIT University, Noida. Sir, I have a question with Naresh sir. Naresh sir talked about environmental management. In my understanding, environmental management something talks about how to manage things to promote environmental sustainability. So, sir, here we are facing a lot of problem in India regarding solid waste management, Ganga pollution, and there is one problem, stubble burning. So after taking a lot of initiative, India is still facing this kind of problems. Like we have more than 200 environmental laws, and we have adopted many environmental principles like sustainable development principle, precautionary principle, Polter's way principles, and there is one more principle which is talks about public trust doctrine. After taking all these initiative, India is still facing environmental problems. So according to you, what kind of initiative India can take more to deal these kind of problems? Thank you, sir.
So according to me, you have to move from dealing with symptoms to dealing with causes. So when you do environmental management and you're working on pollution and waste management and all of that, you are dealing with the symptoms. The cause is how we consume and how we waste, how we produce waste and what we consume and how we manage it. In India, 50% of the waste is wet waste or food waste. That alone is a big change that we can make on how much we waste while we have malnutrition for so many children in this country. So my argument simply is that we have to manage ourselves rather than manage those symptoms. So I'll end that response to you with a quote from Gospet, who was the administrator of the United Nations Development Program. He said, for 30 years, I used to believe that the main environmental problems were climate change, species extinction, and environmental degradations. Now I have come to the understanding that I was wrong. The main environmental problems are selfishness, apathy, and greed. And what we need is not more science. We know that already. We need a spiritual and cultural revolution, and we scientists don't know how to do that. That's my response.
So one more question, if you don't mind.
Get others a chance before we
Okay,
come
no
back
problem.
if you have
No
time.
problem. Thank you,
Any
sir.
more questions? You can just raise your hand, and if you have any more questions, otherwise I can go to the back to the lady. Yeah. So there's no question, so you can please continue with your question.
So my question is that we have created a lot of environment laws and we have following many environmental principles also. But I personally feel that to promote citizens' engagement in environmental law is one of the most important factor to promote environmental sustainability. So what do you want to share on this, about your ideas or your thoughts on this?
Just one very quick response is that we have to move from environmental law to sustainable development law. Environmental law in a country like India, which does not take into consideration 400 million people living in abject poverty, cannot be viable, in my view. And if you take sustainable development law, in which you recognize the rights of people in poverty and so on, and balance that with the realities of environment, we might begin to get it right.
Thank you, sir.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes,
If you
ma'am.
have any
From me.
please.
My name is Lokesh and I am a student of Public Administration in MIT Institute of Public Policy. I have so many questions and I know so less, so please excuse me. So first of all, I would like to ask from Mr. Rajesh Mahapatra. Sir, you talked about the migration of labor which comes into the urban areas, and then there are informal or the unorganized settlements which leads to where in India there's a big problem that most of our cities, as it is an ancient land, they are unplanned cities. So when they come, there is a lack of infrastructure. For example, I have a friend in municipality, and I talked to him. He's working with the Municipal Corporation of Bombay (PMC). So he told me that Lokesh, there are a lack of infrastructure, and first of all, the major problem is the people who come and settle on that land that is not even owned by them. So first of all, there is a dispute between the municipal corporation and the settlers, and again, when they come there, they work in the informal sector or the unorganized sector, as you are an economist yourself. So, sir, how do we counter it? Because there is a lack of, first of all, there is a lack of infrastructure, no proper drainage, no garbage collections, and no
You've got
proper
your,
housing
you've
scheme.
got your question. Have you got your question?
That's the way you frame today's topic. Whose planet is it anyway? Similarly, there is a big question in the urbanization discourse in India today: who runs our cities? Who plans our living spaces? And that is precisely the reason why I talked and I emphasized on rights. Harish said we should look at ourselves as producers rather than consumers. Then, Harish emphasized on the human being than human having. I would bring in a third definition. I don't disagree with any of that, but for me, I emphasize on recognizing and keep reinforcing our identity in a democracy. We are part of a democracy. Our identity is that of a citizen. And a citizen, what differentiates a democracy from a monarchy is, in a democracy, a citizen has rights, duties, and obligations. In a monarchy, he has only duties and obligations. The rights to rule are a divine right for the king or the monarch. That's the difference. If we keep asking this question, who should be running our city? The city residents, who are the citizens. And that's where I think one of the answers, and you have brought up a very good question. Everybody is today talking about it. The other day there was a big conference, and where this question came up, we came up with something called 74th Amendment, which was actually an afterthought to 73rd Amendment. Because, as I said, at one point in time, we were only obsessed with, organizing the villages. The cities grew very fast, and we are lagging. So the 74th Amendment was an afterthought. The time is ripe now. We have to start asking how to implement the 74th Amendment in its letter and spirit, which means give power to city people. Cities should be run by people who live in those cities, and how you design this architecture there has to be a rights-based discourse. It belongs to everybody, just like the planet belongs to everybody. A city belongs to everybody. The slum dweller has as much a right as someone living in a posh enclave or a condominium. That is what we have to reckon with. And rights, I will end by saying, rights are not implemented. Rights are exercised or realized. The government's job, policies are implemented. Policies are a response to the rights. Policies are designed, brought up in order to have rights realized. And as Naresh said very rightly, there are capacity constraints, but at the same time, while we build this capacity of, who will be, what is the word you used, the duty bearer. The duty bearer takes time to build capacities. That should not mean we take our eyes off a rights-based discourse, because rights are exercised. The day you stop talking about rights, rights will never get exercised. Nobody will implement rights. Nobody will bring policy in response to rights. And that is, if long answer to a short question.
And an example to that, what you just said, is that the Supreme Court keeps expanding the scope of the Article 21, and they include right to employment, right to education.
Thank you so much for your question. I could see Bulbul wanting to respond. So Bulbul, do you want to?
Yeah, so, my question is to Bulbul and Harish in response to Rajesh and what Naresh just talked about. So, Bulbul, to you, I want you to talk about what is it that needs to happen for people to be enabled, and especially we're talking about marginalized and gender groups, to be able to exercise these rights as well, Rajesh is talking about. So, you mentioned in your first set of words that women have all these rights, but they're never able to, it's not exercised the way it is. So what is it that stops them? How do we enable those rights, whether through government or otherwise? And Harish, my question to you, the similar question is that, do you think sometimes too much emphasis on rights creates another set of issues, because the rights may themselves be something which may not align with the values of economics, which is efficiency. So what we are seeing right now, there's this huge outburst, the farmers versus the government. So how does one reconcile? There's a right that the farmers think they have, and there are all these analyses that are going on, which kind of try to prove maybe or maybe not. So if you both could opine on this.
So I think what got somewhere sidetracked was the economy ecology debate, because it's not so easy to make that balance. There are losers and gainers, and in both ways. And how do we balance that out? That's an economist's prerogative as well. But it doesn't quite work like that, because the gainers and losers we can't see just in pure capital terms. It has to be other elements, which brings us to other issues which have been flagged, from dignity to equity to other areas which we really need to put in perspective. But it's not just that the policy might be in place, but the language is, if we look at only gender, is not gender neutral in a lot of ways. It's not, mainstreaming is not done at all. You need to have sensitive policies towards, we have the law for, in the Aadhaar card, we have other gender mentioned there. Is there any other gender here, self-proclaimed or otherwise? Have we given that space to anybody to actually acknowledge? Have we given that space for them to come out of the closet? There are all kinds of groups which are there in place. We don't know enough about it, so we put it in the category of, if I have somebody sitting in the panel with me, I have to actually ask, I don't know enough, so how do I address you? The way we are, we've grown up with this whole cis identity, and what is socially accepted doesn't, fall into that category. So these are lots of areas in which we really need to work to equalize and understand. So empathy is the beginning. I'm completely with him on, when Naresh spoke about, or even Rajesh spoke about, the idea. He took a very existentialist stance, which was interesting, and spirituality thrown in. We have the whole dharma concept within environment. If we were to just operationalize that, things would work. We are not really looking at, we don't use that. We use that for discourses, but not in operational terms. A lot of it becomes a lot of rhetoric. So it's not just India, it's a general kind of a thing in how we follow up. Yesterday I was in there was a conference with the Chilean ambassador and others on Chile and India. And I didn't realize how amazing the change has been in Chile. Out of 24 ministers, 14 are women, when 5 years before that, they had not a single woman on that panel. In fact, they have one gay minister, and the pictures that he showed. So if change needs to be sought, it's not going to be easy in countries like ours, but we have to make that change through education. I mean, we have all these, I'm so sorry to say that we have all these policy rights in place. They're all there constitutionally, policies that we get in, which are right, but it's not really followed up in major ways. So if we were to look at the kind of simple kind of example that I want to give is perhaps the most educated of the people who've been accused of say, sexual harassment, from Pachauri, who's from Terry, who's been a Nobel Prize winner as well, or Tarun Tejpal. All of them make the same kind of logic that, that the constables who I'm training on gender sensitization and human rights makes that in a more sophisticated way, that she encouraged me and that's what was it. Whereas education brought us. These are the most educated of the lot that we are speaking about. It's very easy for us to put that juvenile who was uneducated as part of one of the Nirbhaya accused, that he came from that class and, he's sitting on judgment in major ways, trying to say his culture wasn't that, he wasn't taught better. Yet we have things like WhatsApp groups that were going around or Telegram groups that were going around. COVID times, I don't know if you've heard of Boys Locker Room. And that was public school in Delhi, educated youth, adolescent boys who had this group who were talking about raping their classmates. The psychology remains that. So there is a problem with our education. We really need to tap on that at various levels to make that change, even in terms of the sharing element, the terms of, it shouldn't come from above. It shouldn't be something which we have to impose, because punitive action never got us anywhere. How many capital punishments have deterred it happening again? It really doesn't help. It has to be from within. And with that, I'm, completely with Naresh on that spiritual angle, that we have to rethink about who we are and how are we contributing by our, not speaking up on certain issues, allowing things to happen and move in a way. And this is something which it's going to be a very sorry state very soon, because, economically we might come up to whatever level that we do, but in other ways we are really going to lag behind. So we can make that change. We just have to be determined about it. So it's not just the policy from the top. Even that policy, of course, needs to be, managed in a way. But at other levels also, this needs to be looked at in major ways.
Thanks, Bitisha, for that question. Yeah. See, what did the lockdown do? It basically converted all of us into passive people, right? I mean, passive beneficiaries. What did the government say? Government told everybody, you sit at home. Don't work, don't do anything. I'll give you free grain, right? And in fact, it robbed people of their right to work, right? And basically it said, I'm giving you free grain, 10 kg pakda do, sabhi ko, right? So I'm just adding to what Rajesh said. See, in a democracy, we have citizens. We don't have subjects. Okay, citizen is someone who has rights. Okay, a right we recognize the citizen's right as a productive individual. As an active producing person, right? Whereas, what does a monarchy do? Basically it converts you into a beneficiary, into a labharthi, into a passive person. You have no rights. You cannot come to the cities. When I came first to Delhi, I saw 10 lakh farmers. Tikayat brought 10 lakh farmers. Yes, India Gate, boat club. Okay, they stayed there for 10 days. Wahin pe khana banaya, sab kuch tha. Okay, and the government of that time didn't particularly, I mean, they were not really, unnerved or very, they said, "Arey, nahi aana chahiye." Here, we are afraid of even 50,000 people coming, and who are these people? These are producers, right? They are producing our food. And what are they asking? They are just asking, we need a fair price for what we are producing, right? So, I think you were mentioning about the constitution, etc. Constitution will have no meaning if people don't have the right to mobilize, if the right to voice their this thing, rather than just be passive, लाभार्थी बेनिफिशियरी हम आपको सब कुछ देंगे, अरे हमें नहीं चाहिए. Right? I mean, where the people ultimately want to work, people want to produce. So I think same thing as the question you were saying, whether there is a conflict between rights and economic efficiency. Not at all. If you want the farmer not to burn his crop, right, the residue. If you want the farmer to grow millets instead of rice, you pay a price for it. You ensure that when the farmer is producing bajra or jowar, somebody will buy it. The government is announcing an MSP. Why should the farmer produce it free for you? They're not going to produce millets free for you. The farmer is not responsible for pollution or anything. Just as the slum dweller is not responsible for the cities being dirty, etc. I think we need to. These two things are very important. Right of citizen and right of a citizen as a productive individual. I mean, I'm not talking of people who are handicapped, cannot this thing, but even they have. But I think most people, whether it is a teacher, whether it is a barber, whether it is a farmer, they are ultimately producers. And when you recognize that, as a this thing, I think that is I think that is the fundamentals with which, and then everything will fall in place. Including environmental policy, how to produce in a more sustainable manner, using less water, not burning crops. But if we start off with the fact that without farmers, no food, without those laborers, nobody is going to look after this. If you start off with that, I think everything else will fall in place. And also the fact what I think Rajesh was emphasizing, rights. I mean the right to to be heard. If tomorrow if all the slum dwellers were to stop, decide to protest and stop coming to our homes, we are going to be finished, and they should have the right to do that. Just as if all farmers say, hey, one season I'm not going to produce, how much will you import? Who's going to supply for a population of 140 crore? Where is it going to come from? Who's going to supply you wheat?
I think the intention of this panel was not to create any homogeneous kind of a conversation, and I think that is what it really achieved. If anything, it was what you need is a diversity of voices. What you need is not just one it's not just one policy. It could be a variety of policies. It's a variety of ways of approaching a particular domain that needs to be, and those possibilities that each domain might lead to is what you need to keep them open. And so even if we have the three opinions coming from this panel, which might be from three different things, each one of them carries a wager for the future. Each one of them has a potential. We're going to just wrap up because it's it's like I'm getting signals that I should wrap up, but we can probably take it off. So, but then my panelists will respond to answers. So I hope you can take that conversation over lunch. Yes, over lunch you can take that conversation, but because I think a lot has been said, and there's a very, very diverse kind of opinions, which are each one valuable in its own sense, right? Which is, and at the same time, we're talking of rights of people, but we're also talking of rights beyond, rights of nature, rights beyond nature. We're not talking just I'm saying beyond Anthropocene, definitely. So those kind of discussions, and also saying that policy is not, it's not just one policy, right? There are also civilizational notions that we need to take on board, integrate it into, I'm not talking within, so don't get me wrong with that. So nowadays that's become like a word which raises different kind of signals. But because when you were talking of traditional practices and, building those bridges, so we're saying is, how do you create that mindset? And this is, again, there are varieties of discussions around here about how you create that sensibility within the citizen, within the community, within organizations, which can take that agenda forward, which is being discussed in this panel. Where you, whether you want to use the word trusteeship, ownership, or and a variety of things. Ganesh Devi told me that basically that the Indian languages that he's done, it doesn't have the word sustainability. None of the languages have word sustainability in it. And he said the reason is that majority of the people live a sustainable life. He said if you live it, you don't need that word. You demonstrate it. He said, show me one language in India, any Indian language. So sustainability is not a word. You cannot translate it. So that was a fascinating. So what I'm saying is this, just keeping those conversations going. It's itself a part of the democratic imagination. So thank you so much for being a great audience and for an engaged audience. And thank you so much for my panelists for,
You made our job very easy to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, what an enlightening session it has been. As we continue our journey of exploration and discovery in the realm of public policy, let us carry forth the insights gained today to create a better, more sustainable future for all. Thank you.
I would now like to invite the chair of the conference, Dr. Vidisha Banerjee, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. This plenary I call the labor of love. It's on issues that we always sideline or tend to sideline in policy conversations. Let me tell you a little bit about our panelists. Some of you joined a little later. Dr. Chandrika Parmar, she has flown down from Mumbai to come and moderate this session. So I can't thank you enough, Chandrika. When I conceptualized this plenary, I could think of no one better than Chandrika to handle these, diverse thoughts. The idea was to, get as disparate ideas and perspectives and to weave them into a tapestry of a policy discourse that enables empowerment but also enables stakeholder engagement. In public policy, we often talk about stakeholders. We talk about how to engage them. Those of you who are in the dissertation phase, we always talk about this. But who are these stakeholders? Is it always the government? Is it always the corporate? Is it always the ones like you and me who are living in these houses with domestic help, who also know, Bulbul, that the property needs to be divided between the brothers and the sisters? Not really. There are these others. So it is the others who are unheard on the sidelines that we should be talking about. They should not be, Harish, demonstrating on the roads of Delhi, and then you and I have to plan our trip to Amity and figure out which road is blocked. They should be part of the discourse. Dr. Naresh Singh, he's the Executive Vice Dean of OP Jindal University, Department of Jindal Global Public Policy School. He has come all the way from Sonipat. Okay, and probably as he was telling Chandrika that he's probably spent more time on the road, maybe the same time. Chandrika, by the way, called me at 9 o'clock today. Vidisha, I can't make it. I don't think I'll be able to talk. And because I'm coughing. And I had a mini heart attack. I didn't tell her. I was like, I have thought about you all the time. So I'm so glad she is there. I'm so glad Dr. Naresh Singh is there. I'm so glad the farmer Peter Harish was not scheduled for today. He would have definitely said no. When I spoke to Rajesh, he said, "Ghabrao nahi, I'll get you people." So Rajesh, thank you so much. Thank you for also talking about the slums that I work with. And there are so many facets of it that we don't know, but I also think we don't want to know. It's best left not talked about because it would mean we have to pay a higher salary. It would mean that we ask them, "Kaisa raha aapka din?" And what is the answer? The answer is, "Maine aaj jharu diya, maine aaj pocha mara, maine aaj nali saaf kari." Is that what we really want to hear after the end of our very difficult day? Not really. Thank you for bringing that conversation. Bulbul, as always, will bring in gender, but she brings in gender with a very simple philosophy, which is that if we don't even know about something so basic, she talked about rights and property rights. Naresh also talked about property rights. Then how do we expect any conversation to go beyond it? If in urban India we still are hesitant in claiming our property from our parents, forget about our in-laws, then where are we going to include the LGBTQA++ and all the other groups that are traditionally and even now marginalized? And Harish, thank you for being the spokesperson of the farmer, of the land, and of science, which I think is what we also discussed in yesterday's plenary. One of the powerful tools that we all have to augment whatever nature has bestowed on us, but to also ensure that we make sure nature keeps on bestowing and one day doesn't say, I give up. So thank you all for being in this plenary. We have a lot of our faculty members here. We have Dr. Lakshita Bhagat, Dr. Nilanjana Shah, Dr. Ritupata Daman Singh, Dr. Shalini Saxena, Dr. Sukhwant Bindra, Ms. Jayati Talapatra, Dr. Manish Rohtagi, Dr. Yoginder Singh, Mr. Manoj Matthew. We have Ms. Pallavi Maitra. We have a bevy of people and they all wanted to attend this plenary. One of it, I think, because I said it's my labor of love, but really, I think everyone really wanted to hear and you really did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for coming. Very, very grateful. Thank you.
We have one hour right to lunch.
Of course. If you didn't say, I won't. You have to always demand. Can we have a photograph? You can all stand. And then I want a photograph with all the faculty members and people present. Yeah, yeah.
They have a right to photo. I have a right to charge a fee.
That reality won't allow. I'm all the faculty members and